Grab the marshmallows, kids. It's time for a fireside chat. Hello, I'm John Barron.
And I'm Chaz Legidello.
This week, death of a statesman. We'll look at the life and legacy of the late Henry Kissinger.
And we've got the extraordinary story of how America's Quiet Skies Air Marshal program is being compromised and could possibly be deployed as a political weapon. But first...
The death of Henry Kissinger this week at the age of 100 has brought about many glowing tributes and at least as many stark condemnations. So let's try and cut through the mythology that Kissinger himself helped to create and try and get a clear-eyed assessment from somebody who's spent years examining Kissinger's long and influential career. Professor Mario Del Poro is the author of Eccentric Realist, all about Henry Kissinger. Mario, welcome to the Fireside Chat.
Thanks for inviting me. Thanks a lot.
Since his death, Henry Kissinger has been described in many different and varied ways, from one of the great statesmen of the 20th century, a great American, to a war criminal and a despicable human being. On that scale, what is your judgment?
That he was a man in between, possibly overrated, both by hagiographers and critics. He was an intellectual, we know, a scholar of international relations, way more conventional, even orthodox, than many admirers of Kissinger want us to believe. As a statesman, as national security advisor, as Secretary of State, he had some major achievements and successes, but again, he made many mistakes, and possibly his analysis of international politics, the Cold War, the Soviet challenge, were at times even shallow. And some of the achievements that are credited to Kissinger, think of the opening to China, those were in reality, in fact, Richard Nixon's ideas. Kissinger was at first very skeptical, if not hostile, to the idea of opening to China.
Let's talk about that image that he created for himself, starting off as this German academic at Harvard who had this this almost sage-like air about him, somewhere between sort of the Werner von Braun of foreign policy thinking and a chess master. Was he really just pulling the wool over the eyes of everyone from, Rockefeller and Nixon through to Obama and Trump?
No, he was pretty much a Cold War intellectual. He somehow was part of the Cold War culture, and even the Cold War Academy, you rightly mentioned, Harvard and all the projects he led at Harvard. At the same time, he was capable of selling himself very effectively as the no-nonsense European realist, teaching naive, immature America the perennial rules of international relations, providing a sort of, fast-forward tutoring of this America into adulthood and maturity, given that the United States has a new role to play in the international system. And, with his intellectual formation as a historian, as an international relations expert, his thick American accent, his realist jargon, if you will, he was very successful, particularly in specific periods and phases of American history.
Mary, you credit Nixon more than Kissinger for initiating ideas such as the opening of China. What influence do you think Kissinger did have on Nixon? Because one shorthand is to say, well, Kissinger, the realist, turned the sort of, anti-communist, red-baiting ideologue Richard Nixon into much more of a pragmatic international figure. Is that a complete myth?
It's a partial myth. Nixon was not so unsophisticated as sometimes we think he was, and he had a deep interest in foreign policy, and more specifically in Asia and China. Well before being elected president, he had published a famous article on China and what China could offer to the U.S. It was the president who called the shots. Then with Kissinger, they formed a true couple, so to speak. And there was a constant interaction between the two. And Kissinger was in many ways the executive arm of projects, visions, ideas, plans that originated at the White House. This is not to minimize the role of Kissinger at all. Kissinger did play a role, and even if he was skeptical initially about the opening to China, then he became an enthusiast advocate of this attempt to integrate China within a US-led global order. I don't know how many times he had then visited China. He became a sort of, pro-China voice in Washington, and sometimes in recent times, even a voice of reason with rationality with regard to China. But let's say that it was, at the end of the day, which is normal, it was the president and Nixon who called the shots.
Mario, early on you used that word overrated to assess Henry Kissinger. Does that equally apply to the obituaries that talk about how he continued to advise a dozen American presidents after leaving office in early 1977? Who were the presidents that listened to Kissinger in the post-Ford administration era, and who are the ones that just were kind of humouring him? It was easy just to let him in for a cup of coffee and see him on his way.
I don't think many presidents and administrations really sought Kissinger's advice. They played on the myth of Henry Kissinger. And the myth of Kissinger is the myth of the, as I said, of the no-nonsense European realpolitiker, which tells Americans how international relations must be conducted, how you have to behave in the international arena. And according to some, perennial, eternal rules, which he masters, he knows, and he can, and this knowledge, this applied knowledge can be offered to the presidents or the prince. He always was eager to advise and please.
Finally, Mario, if in your assessment the achievements credited to Henry Kissinger have been overrated, can we also say that the crimes against humanity, the narrative that here he was, somebody whose family escaped the looming Holocaust in Germany of the 1930s, his actions led to the genocide in Cambodia, the brutal dictatorship in Chile, the atrocities that were inflicted by the Indonesians in East Timor. So many things that people say, well, the Kissinger body count is massive. Can we also say, well, you know what, he wasn't that important in those areas as well, or does he carry the blame?
He carries a portion of the blame, along with many others. And I guess by the same standards, we could, accuse of being war criminals a lot of people in the US and elsewhere, a lot of, political leaders in the long post-1945 age and during the Cold War. When I say he was one of the actors, it means that the equation behind all the tragedies you mentioned, the variables in those equations were many. You take Chile. It wasn't just Kissinger. It wasn't just Kissinger and Nixon. It was a very complex situation with multiple actors, domestic and even international. Recent historiography has studied the Chilean coup by highlighting also the role of other external actors, Brazil, regional, Brazil, Cuba, or by highlighting the centrality of domestic actors, the Chilean army, the debate within the discussion within the Chilean army, and so forth and so on. Kissinger and Nixon and the Nixon administration, they were involved, but they weren't just, moving some marionettes around. It was a much more complicated situation. So I don't want to minimize Kissinger's responsibilities, but I think they have been exaggerated and somehow contributed themselves to feeding this mythology of Kissinger as, this kind of, Super K, as the cover of Newsweek once titled, with the image of Kissinger, wearing a Superman costume.
That's a frightening mental image. Mario, thank you.
Thanks for having me. Thank you.
Now, John, that was great, but I'd like you just to pretend for a second, just get in your imagination space. Imagine that I know nothing about history.
Okay.
And I'm a complete ignoramus about Henry Kissinger.
Right.
and I have nothing to add because I am a blank slate when it comes to Henry Kissinger.
You want me to imagine all of that?
Just imagine all that. Of course, it's not true, but just imagine all that.
For sure.
What would you say to that fictional person that you're imagining I am, even though I'm not?
Interesting thought exercise, Chaz, and I'll try. I'll do my best. Look, I think the thing is, if you don't know much about Henry Kissinger, it's important to know that he was not just another national security advisor in the mould of, say, a John Bolton or a Zbigniew Brzezinski, or he wasn't just another Secretary of State in the mould of an Antony Blinken now. Henry Kissinger in the early 1970s through to 1977 was possibly, with the exception of Richard Nixon himself, the then American president, and President Ford, was probably the most famous man in the world. 3 years in a row, he was voted by the American public as the most admired man in the world. So it's usually the Pope that wins those polls. Henry Kissinger won that 3 years in a row, which, bear in mind, he was born in Germany in 1923. His Jewish family emigrated to the United States on the eve of the Second World War, so avoided the Holocaust. But he then became a Harvard academic, a foreign policy thinker, but very influential, and then he moved into diplomacy. But he really had this air of the professor about him, that he was this wise head that really knew more about the complexities of Europe and Germany and the world and the Cold War in particular. And so he was really a very significant figure that had, as Mario said in our interview, this real mythology built up around him, as if he was kind of a Superman that you could just fly into a trouble spot anywhere in the world, and through shuttle diplomacy, which he pioneered with TV cameras covering every step of the way, he was able to try and prevent World War III, try and stop the Yom Kippur War of 1973 from escalating into a major global conflict. So he created this aura. He dated Hollywood stars. He went out with Shirley MacLaine, Candice Bergen, Jill St. John. He loved the limelight. He loved hobnobbing.
Candice Bergen.
Murphy Brown went out with Henry Kissinger in the 1970s. So, you know, he was somebody who liked the limelight as much as he liked the power and the proximity to power that he enjoyed in those years in the White House. So a very, very interesting cultural figure who cut through from those sort of stuffy corridors of academia and the sort of the back rooms of diplomacy into fully fledged American 1970s style stardom.
Okay, now that fictional version of me, that's complete ignorance.
Sure, yeah.
Even that version of me can go on Twitter. In fact, that version of me belongs on Twitter. And on Twitter, it's apparent that a lot of people hate him.
Yep.
So my question is, when did superstar dating Murphy Brown, Henry Kissinger, become this figure of hate? How did that happen?
He's definitely a figure of hate on the political left because of the way that at various times he used in his diplomacy to try and bring about an end to America's involvement in the Vietnam War. He often used the military escalation, carpet bombing involving the deaths of thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of civilians as a diplomatic negotiating ploy. So if you want to get the North Vietnamese back to the negotiating table in the Paris round of talks, he would, and you can hear it on the White House tapes, he would say, we're going to bomb the bejesus out of them. That's what we have to do. And of course, when he escalated the war and he and Nixon spread the war into Cambodia, and there was a overthrow of the Cambodian regime, it ushered in the Khmer Rouge, a brutal communist, almost Taliban-like in their return to year zero. There was a genocide, or not quite on the scale of the Nazi Holocaust, but almost. We're talking about millions of dead people as a result of Cambodia being drawn into this conflict by the Americans, again escalating it. So he is seen as having blood on his hands. They're also very happy to see right-wing fascist dictatorships taking over in places like Chile. So it made a mockery of any preaching he might have done about democracy. They didn't care about democracy, and they didn't care about the body count. That's the rap on him. And so did the left hate him at the time, or was that something in hindsight that happened? Yeah, famously in 1973, Henry Kissinger was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. At that time, the satirical songwriter Tom Lehrer announced that he was retiring from show business and going back to being himself an academic mathematician, because he said, if Henry Kissinger has won the Nobel Peace Prize, satire is dead. And so he quit. he was probably wanting to quit anyway. He did say he was going to, Tom Lehrer did say he was going to, he wouldn't come back until the Berlin Wall came down, but then he never did.
No, fair enough. Okay, well, that's history. Now let's get to the part of me that knows something.
Yes.
Which is, of course, the part that knows Henry Kissinger.
Of course. You were just playing the part extremely well.
That's
but
right.
the other part of you has been looking very closely at Congress this week, where the clock is ticking again on a government shutdown. So clearly they've been laser focused on just that and only that this week, avoiding a shutdown, passing some spending bills.
Just to be clear, there is 16 congressional days to go after today before the first shutdown. There are now 2 shutdowns baked into their schedule coming forward.
January, February.
Yep, first one is 16 congressional days from now. They have to pass 12 appropriations bills in 16 days, and they need to agree with the Senate over what will be in those 12 bills, even though the Senate completely agrees with them.
Burning the midnight oil, hard at work on that.
The number of minutes they spent on any of those appropriation bills this week was 0.
Really?
So why don't we talk about the things they spent time on?
Please.
First of all, there was an attempt to subpoena Hunter Biden.
Yep.
Right, which is very important right now. The president's son.
And he was saying, I'll happily come along and I'll testify in public.
I got the quote right here. His lawyer said, "We've seen you use closed-door sessions to manipulate, even distort the facts and misinform the public. We therefore propose opening the door. Our client will get right to it by agreeing to answer any pertinent and relevant question you or your colleagues might have, but rather than subscribing to your cloaked, one-sided process, he will appear at a public oversight and accountability committee hearing." To which James Comer, the head of the Oversight Committee, said, no. He wanted to be behind closed doors. He said, Hunter Biden's trying to play by his own rules instead of following the rules required of everyone else. That won't stand with House Republicans. Our lawfully issued subpoena to Hunter Biden requires him to appear for a deposition on December 13. We expect full cooperation with our subpoena for a deposition, but also agree that Hunter Biden should have opportunity to testify in a public setting at a future date. So he says, some other time.
Right, but right now we want to see if we can put you in a perjury trap.
Yeah, basically. But also, as well as that, they characterised it, Hunter Biden's lawyer characterised it in a way that I wouldn't. But I think it's fair to say that James Comer has been making a bit of a habit of having these closed-door sessions and then turn up on Fox News and saying that people said things.
Which they didn't really say.
A few days later, a transcript comes out and you go, that's a little bit different to what he said on Fox News.
Yeah, right.
So there might be a bit of that as well. There's going to be a standoff about this because it's very hard to turn someone down when they say, I want to testify in public.
Sure.
And the Democrats, of course, taunting him hard.
Yep.
December 13 is when this meant to happen, so it's probably just under 2 weeks.
And part of the danger as well is not necessarily even down to what Hunter Biden says, but the way that he will say it. I mean, there's a real chance that Hunter Biden, who for many Americans is just those photos of him looking completely destitute, unshaved, drug frenzy, in pornographic pictures and all that kind of thing, that he might in fact look like a very sympathetic figure, a man who's got his life back together, that isn't the demonised Hunter Biden of the internet.
There's certainly a factor. Either way, I think in the end that it's. I don't think he's going to testify in public on December 13, but they're certainly going to try, and they're going to waste more time in Congress debating about that.
Yeah.
Another thing they've talked about this week is a potential fiscal commission and that's a serious matter about the fact that not just that America has a multi-trillion-dollar deficit at the moment, but the prospects are that it's going to get worse because they are now entering that period that they've talked about for decades, where the demographics are such that Social Security and Medicare are going to run bigger and bigger deficits, and it is those two programs in particular, and the Republicans will not let the Democrats raise taxes, and to be honest, even if they were allowed to raise as many taxes as they wanted to, they still probably wouldn't completely close the deficit. And so the idea that they came up with I think it's 2011 under Obama, they had a fiscal commission. The idea was these people will make a recommendation and then Republicans, Democrats can hold hands and jump in the pool together. Yep. And mutually assured destruction, we can't criticise each other, and that way we can make a change. That is kind of what happened in the 80s under Reagan. It didn't work out that way in 2011. In 2011, Democrats...
It was the Simpson-Bowles process.
That's the one.
Yeah.
And even Obama gave up on that halfway through, and before long the Democrats were saying, you want us to cut a whole bunch of Medicare and Social
Right.
Security for poor people. You don't want to raise the Senate taxes. What are you doing? And the Republicans are going, oh, you guys were sabotaging it from the beginning. Lack of trust.
Yeah.
Right now, there's even less trust. So I don't know what the chances of that are, but both Joe Manchin and Mitt Romney have been testifying at a hearing about this to try. It's easy for them. They're both retiring.
Yeah.
It's,
Yeah, I think Joe and Mitt have got a greater chance of becoming co-presidents than they do of getting a bipartisan debt reduction deal that has both sides take a little bit of pain, because both sides are not just addicted to either spending on their pet programs, whether it is entitlements or tax cuts for the rich, but they like the politics of it. It plays to their bases. Both sides, it's their bread and butter. They don't want to fix this.
Absolutely. And the fact is, while the theory is they hold hands and jump in the pool together,
Yeah.
the bottom line is it doesn't matter whether you blame the Fiscal Commission or not. It's your vote.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, it's your vote. Now, do you want on your record, I voted to cut Social Security and Medicare or not? And I should say one other thing, that we talk about bankrupt, the country being bankrupt, or Social Security being bankrupt, or Medicare being bankrupted. That's actually misleading terminology. What the risk is here, and there is a genuine risk. What the risk is here is that in 10 years or in 15 years, or maybe even less, maybe in 7 or 8 years, they'll wake up and say, hang on, Social Security is making now less money than it is handing out. So there will be an automatic cut, which is loaded into the program, so that rather than paying 100% of your Social Security, you'll pay 83% or 85% or whatever. It's not going to go bankrupt. The government's not going to go, I've got nothing in my pockets. It's just what will happen is there will be an across-the-board cut for everyone under those programs if that occurs.
And they've been talking about the looming bankruptcy of the social security system for at least 50 years.
Yeah.
So this has been around for a while. I'll tell you, my favourite story out of Congress this week.
Please.
Well, it wasn't so much in Congress, it was in the cafeteria on the Senate side of Congress,
Yes.
where Iowa Senator Joni Ernst, junior senator from Iowa, Republican, was having her lunch. She started to choke. This is quite serious. She started to choke on her lunch. And Rand Paul, Republican senator from Kentucky, who is an ophthalmologist by training,
Dr. Rand Paul.
Dr. Rand Paul,
He likes to call himself.
performed the Heimlich manoeuvre and possibly saved her life. Certainly saved her from choking. She might have coughed it up, who knows. Which was like, well, isn't that great? Rand Paul has done something useful at last. It was a great thing that had happened. And then Joni Ernst had to try and politicise it, which is a little disappointing
Did she do that?
for those of us who thought
Wasn't it a
that...
Democrat piece of ham?
Well, could have been. We'll get it checked. But she sent out this tweet saying, can't help but choke on the woke policies Dems are forcing down our throats. Thanks, Dr. Rand Paul.
Okay.
Really?
Okay.
They can't resist the politics, Chaz. That's why they'll never reduce the debt.
I'll tell you what's happening there. What's happening there is Joni Ernst made a terrible mistake when she first became a senator, which was for the first couple of years.
Was first becoming a senator?
That was a huge mistake, but even a bigger mistake. First couple of years, she was extremely reasonable, extremely sensible,
was.
extremely moderate.
And very popular because of it.
very popular. But you can't do that. That's not how the Senate works. That's not how politics works in America. So ever since then, she's been trying to make up for it by being over the top partisan at every possible opportunity to show her base. I'm actually one of you. I'm not reasonable and sensible and moderate like you thought I was for a little while there.
It's true. I mean, she had to start that way because she was elected to replace a Democrat in Tom Harkin. And Iowa in that time as well has become increasingly conservative and Trumpy too. So she's moving with the politics, but I don't know, she couldn't resist the politics.
One more thing I should mention, because this is actually what they spent most of the week on, is there is a bill which is, this is an important bill. Not as important as keeping the entire government open, but still, it's an important bill. It's the bill which Biden has been trying to pass for months, well, for at least a month, the $106 billion bill combining Ukraine funding, which they still haven't passed for a long time, Israel funding and other national security priorities, including some involving Australia and submarines, I might add.
Yes.
Chuck Schumer's trying to pass that through the Senate as quickly as he can. Mitch McConnell is saying, no, we need funding for immigration on top of that, immigration reform on top of that. And the quote from Mitch McConnell is, unfortunately, Senate Democrats have already suggested they want to condition urgent resources for one of our top security priorities on not addressing another one. This sort of cynical, short-sighted politics has denied the American people real border security too many times. Now, that doesn't make sense to me at all, but the fact is they're trying to sneak in immigration reform on this. I've got sympathy for people saying we shouldn't combine a whole bunch of different bills together. You know, if you want to do Ukraine by itself, you want to do Israel by itself, fine. But to try and just throw in immigration reform, which has nothing to do with it at all. And essentially the two sticking points, the Democrats are kind of rolling with it because they know they're not going to get Ukraine funding up otherwise. But the two biggest sticking points as far as I can see is, number one, there's something I talked about a few weeks back, the viewers may or may not remember. One of the tactics that Joe Biden's introduced to immigration was called parole, where he says, okay, to try and discourage people from, say, Venezuela coming over illegally, I will allow 30,000 or whatever Venezuelans to come over per month officially under parole because they require help because their country's falling apart, essentially. I think it's 30,000 for all 4 countries that are part of the program combined, essentially. And the Republicans have said, no, that's 30,000 immigrants we don't need. You're allowed to do parole, but only on a case-by-case basis, not for entire countries.
I see.
And the Democrats don't want to do that because they argue that's the only thing that's keeping the immigration numbers where they are. They'd be even higher without that, because if you provide no legal method by which people can immigrate legally, they will immigrate illegally if they're trying to escape their countries. That's the logic. And the other thing which Republicans want is a guarantee, apparently, a guarantee that illegal immigration will be reduced by half. I don't know how that's even possible. Like, I mean, I'm sure it's possible, but I don't know how you can guarantee it in a bill.
Well, you can say you're going to do it. And then, we didn't do it.
Anyway, the Democrats are saying no, and the Republicans, that's the Republicans in the Senate, the Republicans in the House are going even further, and they don't want any Ukraine funding at all, although Mike Johnson, the Speaker, is trying to get the Ukraine funding through, but they want even stricter immigration control. So there's a big standoff there, and we'll see what happens.
Now, you spent a bit of time this week watching Fox News.
I did.
Better you than me. And you actually learned something quite useful. Yeah,
this was actually really weird. I was doing just my usual reading and viewing as per usual, and I'm going, and all of a sudden a story comes on, which I couldn't believe. It's an incredible clip. It's about the air marshals who, you might recall after 9/11, they were the ones who were placed on planes to provide extra security against would-be hijackings, okay? Now, I'm going to play you a pretty big slab here. It's like a 2-minute clip from Fox News directly, because it's worth seeing this topic up properly, and it's extraordinary.
Okay, so how many air marshals are on planes right now, and how many do you think there should be to get to a safe level?
Well, Carly, we're not flying right now. The only missions that we're doing are Quiet Skies missions, and those are missions that are following the January 2021 people. So we're either on the border for illegal immigrants, or we're following folks from January 2021. We're not doing our regular missions where we're out there looking for the bad guys. So right now on most flights, you're not going to have air marshals.
What do you mean by that? You're following January 2021 people. What does that mean?
That means our primary mission is a little group called Quiet Skies. It's a mission called Quiet Skies that we're following people that flew into the National Capital Region in January 2021. You did not have to go to the Capitol or the rally, and you've been put on a specific list that TSA now has assigned air marshals to follow these people who have not had any type of criminal investigation. They haven't committed a crime, but yet 3 years later, we're following the same individuals day in and day out.
So you're saying that air marshals are now following people that were at the Capitol on January 6th, and they're not tracking terrorists at all?
Well, they didn't even have to be at the Capitol, Carly. They could have just flown into the National Capital Region. So if anybody was there for a job interview, to visit family, we even had a gentleman that was there for a funeral. They put on this domestic terrorist list just because of their geographic location to Washington, D.C. So these people did not even commit a crime. They weren't even at the Capitol.
What? Do those people know that they're on this list?
Some of them do, because when they go to the airport, they get the quad S's on their boarding pass, and then they have to go through enhanced security. Then they're followed by teams of air marshals on any leg of flight that they have. So yes, a lot of them do know that they're being followed, yet they haven't been vetted and they have not committed a crime. And 3 years later, we're still doing the same duty, and we followed the same people over and over for 3 years who are no threat to this country.
Whoa. Now, first of all, great job from the Fox News anchor there, quite seriously, for bringing out that story on the fly that she was not expecting. But I thought there had to be more to this, surely. So, as they say in the modern classics, I did my own research on the Quiet Skies program, and look, it appears to be 100% real. It's there on the TSA website. They explain it, even though it seems strange to me for two reasons. Number one, the huge waste of national security resources we're talking about there. And two, the civil liberties implications of tracking people who haven't even come close to doing anything wrong. There are some real horror stories on the web too as well about air marshals following other air marshals because the second air marshal's wife is on the list and they've got to hand in their gun to each other. It's just bizarre. So look, I tried to get in touch with that expert. Her name is Sonia Labosco. She's the director of the Air Marshal National Council, so she should know what's going on there. And I'm pleased to say she is standing by waiting for us right now. So, Sonia, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. We appreciate the invite.
Now, on Fox, you referred to Quiet Skies focusing on people who flew into the capital region in January 2021. Now, do you mean January 6, 2021, or are there people in the Quiet Skies program who flew into the capital region on different days in January 2021?
Well, really, we're talking about January 6, 2021. So we're talking a few days prior or a few days after. That's the focus of the Quiet Skies program.
Yeah, okay. And what exactly does the Quiet Skies program involve? Is it simply air marshals hopping onto the same flight as the passenger, or does it involve surveillance at the airport, or does it involve other elements as well?
Well, we're talking surveillance. It can always be from your home as a passenger. So we can follow you from your home to the airport, on the aircraft, looking at your phone, trying to get a sneak of your computer. Who are you talking to? This can involve your relatives as well. If you're traveling with family, it can be your grandparents, your aunts, your uncles, your nieces, your nephews, anyone you come in contact with, really.
And it's perfectly legal to do all of that to someone who just happened to be flying to Washington around January 6th?
Well, we don't believe that it's legal. We believe that TSA has overstepped their bounds when it comes to the Privacy Act and your constitutional rights. So we don't think that this is legal, and we're challenging TSA to prove that it's legal.
Once you're on the Quiet Skies list, if you obviously shouldn't be there, as I imagine many people shouldn't, can they take you off it, or do you just stay there for however long?
Well, the natural progression of the list, if you get on this list, it's normally a 7-year list. You're on there for 7 years, and then you're kind of like on a probationary period. If nothing happens within that 7-year period, you have another 8 years that if you act well or you don't get into a spat with the flight attendant or someone at the airport, if you do, you can be put back on that list. So it's basically almost a 15-year list once you get placed on it, and you need 8 years of good behavior to get off of it.
Who is the most ridiculous person that you know of that has found themselves on that list?
An 8-week-old baby. We have an 8-week-old baby on this list right now.
That's pretty ridiculous. Do you have any knowledge of any air violence ever being curbed by the Quiet Skies program?
Not one, not zero, not one air violence incident, not one person, not one terrorist, not one.
Okay, so presumably there were other people who used to be followed around by the Quiet Skies program, who would be considered more of a risk than an 8-week-old baby, say. What's happened to them? Are they being tracked at all, or has they just been left alone?
I think they're just basically, at this point, they're being left alone. I mean, this political pendulum started swinging after January the 6th toward this Quiet Skies program, which the program's been around for many, many years. I want to put that out. It's been around before January 6, 2021. But the air marshals have never seen it utilized in such a manner for political purposes as it is after January the 6th, 2021.
Can I ask what kind of people they used to follow before January 6th?
They would be actual known suspected terrorists. These are individuals that would come from a foreign country or a foreign land that's on our terrorist watch list. A special interest alien, a SIA. These are actual people that could have been to a training camp that had actual explosives, training, things of that nature, martial arts training, someone that would actually want to take over an aircraft and try to control the passengers on that aircraft while they were doing it.
And you're saying that these days there is literally no one being tracked by air marshals other than the January 6 people?
Literally, as of right now, we have two full-time duties. One, we're on the border, ushering illegal immigrants across the border, the air marshals, or we're following Quiet Skies January 6 folks. So that's the only two major missions right now the air marshals are doing.
Let's just talk for a second about the border then as well, because that's also baffling. So air marshals are currently are they just working the same as the border patrol just next to them?
No, they're not. We're doing non-law enforcement duties, so we're not doing any type of law enforcement duties. We're doing security perimeter checks. We are checking on facilities. We're taking migrants to the hospitals if they have to get treatment. We're staying with them while they're at the emergency medical care. We're doing everything but thwarting hijackings down on the border, and we're not needed there. These are all non-government organizations down there. The American Red Cross, they're doing the same thing that we're doing on the border.
So you're pretty overqualified for the job you're doing on the border.
I would think when we're trying to do a linear assault in the aircraft, that's much different than bringing a cooler of water and handing it out on the border. Yes, I think our skills are not being utilized very well on the border.
You represent air marshals, so you would know. How do they feel about spending so much of their time following around random January 2021 Washington visitors?
Well, they're not very happy about it at all because, this is not the mission that we had. When we came over after 9/11, I was an air marshal as well, and I deployed internationally and domestically. We all came over for a patriotic reason to ensure that another 9/11 didn't happen. We had 2,977 people that were murdered that day. That was the whole nexus of what we were supposed to be doing. So now you can understand how degraded they feel, how undervalued they feel because they're not allowed to do their job. They're not out there protecting the skies. And that was the main reason that many of us came over after 9/11.
And I know this is calling for speculation. You might not want to do this, but in your view, is this the result of a triggered, gun-shy, panicking Homeland Security Department, or is this the result of political interference?
This is definitely a result it's not really speculation. There was a call to action from the swamp in Congress. There was actually a letter from one of the congressional representatives right after 9/11, right after January 6, 2021. January the 11th, there was a letter written to the TSA Administrator, Pekoski, asking him to disrupt the passenger travel of those that were in the National Capital Region or were there on January the 6th, 2021. So this was actually a call to action from members of the swamp in Congress to do these things against political opponents.
Finally, do Congress people know about this? And if so, how come we haven't heard more about this? I would have expected this to be a massive outrage.
Congress does know about it. We've brought air marshals to testify. We've been talking about this issue now for 2 years. We have air marshals that will be back on Capitol Hill next week. So they're very aware of it. And we've had quite a bit of interest from some of the oversight committees. But what we're really asking for is for this to stop. And let's get back to where we need to be. And that's focusing on those that could try to take over an aircraft. We've got our eye off the prize of national security right now. So to answer your question, yes, Congress knows. And we are hoping they're going to take action soon to stop this egregious, nefarious actions that are happening against American citizens that have not been proven to have committed a crime. They haven't even been vetted for a crime.
Sonia Labuschagne, thanks so much for visiting Planet America.
Thank you very much for having us. God bless America.
Well, that was wild, and I've looked everywhere for a response from the TSA or Homeland Security to Sonia's allegations. Haven't found any yet. She's making a big noise though, so I expect it'll be coming soon. When I hear something, I'll let you know.
Well, look, after she's been on this show, demand answers. They got some splaining to do. Look, next Wednesday in Tuscaloosa, Alabama, Republican presidential candidates, including Ron DeSantis and Nikki Haley, will face off in the 4th Republican primary debate. Absent again will be the overwhelming frontrunner, though, Donald Trump. It looks likely that entrepreneur Vivek Ramaswamy will qualify, although former New Jersey governor and Trump frenemy Chris Christie is struggling. still to meet the poll and donor thresholds. We don't know if he's going to be there or not. So far, of course, it's Nikki Haley who's been the breakout performer in these debates, helping to fuel a bit of a rise in national and early state polls, potentially positioning her now as Trump's closest, albeit distant, rival. But Chaz, history suggests that these primary debates in particular, which continue right through until the start of next year, with or without Donald Trump, can have a very significant impact on the race for the White House. Take a look.
And now for the first opening statement by Senator John F. Kennedy.
Well, the famous 1960 debates between Senator John F. Kennedy and Vice President Richard Nixon were the first televised debates between a Democratic and Republican presidential nominee. They were not the first involving presidential contenders. On May 17, 1948, Republican New York Governor Tom Dewey debated his rival, former Minnesota Governor Harold Stassen, in Portland ahead of the Oregon primary. This was early in the Cold War with the Soviet Union, and amid a Red Scare, a Republican bill was before Congress proposing a ban on the Communist Party in America. Stassen had 20 minutes to argue the affirmative. He said it should be banned.
The communist organizations in the world are absolutely directed by the rulers of Russia in the Kremlin.
Tom Dewey then had 20 minutes to make the negative case.
Unalterably, wholeheartedly, unswervingly against any scheme to write laws outlawing people because of their religious, political, social, or economic ideas.
Both candidates did pretty well, but Tom Dewey was declared the winner by most reporters, and the voters of Oregon agreed, giving him a 4-point win in the primary. Dewey won the Republican nomination, but was the shock loser to President Harry Truman that November. Harold Stassen, by the way, ran for president another 8 times, the last being in 1992, when miraculously he had a lot more hair.
He's still alive, and here he is.
The first televised presidential primary debate was in 1956. The bookish, intellectual Democratic governor of Illinois, Adlai Stevenson, who'd lost in 1952 to Republican Dwight Eisenhower, was running again. And again, his main Democratic rival was the wonderfully named Senator Estes Kefauver of Tennessee.
I think there's room for new ideas and younger people in both of our political parties.
The genial, slow-talking Southerner had become nationally famous with televised Senate hearings into organised crime.
You must have in your mind some things you've done that you can speak of to your credit as an American citizen. If so, what are they? Paid by tax.
Kefauver seemed to quite like all the attention he was getting, even appearing on game shows like What's My Line?
Are you Senator Kefauver?
Yeah.
By 1956, more than 75% of American homes had at least one TV set, so appearances suddenly mattered a lot more than before. And if Adlai Stevenson looked like everyone's favourite college professor, Estes Kefauver was possibly more reminiscent of an old-time sheriff played in a Western movie by the likes of Gary Cooper.
The judges left town, Harvey's quit, and I'm having trouble getting deputy.
The Stevenson-Kefauver TV debate covered a range of issues, including civil rights and the economy, although, again, the Cold War dominated. It was held on May 21st in Miami ahead of the Florida primary.
Senator Kefauver got off to a strong start in this primary race by winning Minnesota. Governor Stevenson came back strong in Oregon last week.
They had 3 minutes for opening statements, 5 minutes for closing remarks, and freewheeling questions in between. It was also the day after America had tested the new, devastating hydrogen bomb dropped on the Bikini Atoll in the Pacific, and that was certainly on Stevenson's mind.
The future is either going to be a future of creativity and of great abundance, or it's going to be a future of total incineration, death and destruction.
It set a sombre tone. The candidates agreed on most things. The New York Times huffed that they took virtually identical positions on almost every issue they discussed. Although there was also a bit of bad blood that had built up over the course of their campaign over Stevenson's claims that Kefauver was often absent from the Senate.
So I was a little bit surprised that you thought it necessary or proper to at least talk about this absenteeism.
Now, Governor Stevenson, have you got some questions or observations, maybe, that you'd like to make?
I'd
These
say
seem
to
to be
the
more
Senator that if I've
nature of
offended him,
observations.
I'm sorry.
But all in all, it was pretty civilised stuff. The Times didn't declare a winner, although Adlai Stevenson's foreign policy strength certainly shone through. He won the Florida primary and the Democratic nomination. He threw his vice presidential pick over to delegates at the convention who came close to nominating a fresh-faced young senator from Massachusetts named Jack Kennedy. But in the end, the votes went to Estes Kefauver, and the Stevenson-Kefauver ticket was soundly defeated by President Eisenhower and his VP Richard Nixon. Stevenson was later appointed United Nations ambassador by President John F. Kennedy in 1961.
I'm prepared to wait for my answer until hell freezes over.
Now, here is the moderator for the debate.
Since then, primary debates have only grown in importance. Kennedy honed his debating and television skills against his Democratic rivals, Hubert Humphrey and Lyndon Johnson, in separate debates in 1960 before his general election encounters with Nixon. Generally, when members of the same political party are debating each other, their policy differences are small, but that can lead to some very personal, even downright nasty exchanges, as candidates tussle over who has the strength, personality or integrity to be president.
He is funneling money to his wife's law firm for state business. That's number one. I don't care what you say about me, but you ought to be ashamed of yourself for jumping on my wife. You're not worth being on the same platform
I'll tell
as my
you something,
wife.
Mr. Clinton.
Now,
don't try to escape it.
And sometimes the candidates' temperaments have been put to the test.
Is this on? Mr. Green,
Did you turn on my microphone?
you asked for me if you would... I am paying for this microphone, Mr.
And there have been questions of likability.
He's very likable. I agree with that. I don't think I'm that bad.
You're likable enough.
Thank you so much.
And sometimes it's all been about the size of their hands.
Look at those hands. Are they small hands? And he referred to my hands. If they're small, something else must be small. I guarantee you there's no problem. I guarantee it.
That's not what Stormy said, but still, sometimes primary debates have seen stumbles and gaffes that have helped derail campaigns.
The third agency of government, I would do away with the education, commerce, and let's see, I can't. The third one I can't, sorry. Oops.
No incumbent or former president facing a primary challenge has ever appeared in a debate. Joe Biden is not expected to debate Congressman Dean Phillips or Marianne Williamson in the Democratic primary, and Trump continues to sit out these Republican debates. That then leaves a question for 2024. If it is a Biden-Trump rematch, will there be any debates at all? So the Independent Presidential Debates Commission has already announced a schedule for 3 debates to be held in September and October of next year, but neither President Biden nor former President Trump have given any guarantees that they will take part in them. There is a 15% threshold for candidates to qualify, so it's not impossible that Robert F. Kennedy Jr., for instance, could qualify for the debates. That then leaves the prospect of, well, do you just give the airtime to Robert F. Kennedy Jr.? Do you allow Jill Stein or Cornel West or maybe Joe Manchin or whoever else is running onto the stage if you need to have a debate? Or do you just call the whole thing off and say, you know what, none of us need to see a Trump-Biden debate again? What do you think?
Get DeSantis and Newsom back.
Yeah!
Over and over again, 20 debates.
Welcome to hell.
OK, first of all, let's split this up. Are there going to be debates? I'm sure the person who's losing is going to want to have a debate. That's usually how it works.
Yep.
Trump did say back in 2020 that he'd had it with the debate commission.
Yep.
So he's got form for saying he doesn't want to do it. If Biden wants there to be a debate, he should act like he doesn't want to have a debate. Then Trump will want a debate. But, I don't know. I think it really does depend on whether Donald Trump is losing. If Donald Trump's losing, I think there'll be a debate. Because he'll want a debate, and Biden is not going. Then Trump will taunt Biden, and then Biden will.
Chris Christie's been trying to taunt Donald Trump into the primary debates. It hasn't worked, which seems to suggest that there is really no point in Chris Christie still running for president, particularly if he misses out on next week's debate. You'd have to say it's time for Chris Christie to drop out of that contest. Historically, though, incumbent presidents have usually had very bad, at least first debates, because they haven't been campaigning in quite the same way. They haven't had primaries. They're often a bit rusty. They're also a little bit out of practice with people, contradicting them to their face, standing up to them. You think back to, Trump had a train wreck first debate when he was, tried to give Biden COVID, did give Chris Christie COVID, and Barack Obama had a terrible first debate against Mitt Romney. There's Ronald Reagan, of course, in 1984 against Walter Mondale, famously really put his re-election in doubt with a terrible, stumbling, fumbling, old man-looking debate performance. Yeah. Joe Biden, he'd be running at an awful risk of looking just completely shot.
Honestly, I think it's in his interest to debate, and I'll tell you why. The first one is because of the knock on him because of his age.
Yeah.
The best way...
You say expectations are so low, if he can feed himself, he wins.
That was certainly the case last time. In 2020, remember, the expectations were rock bottom for him,
sure.
and he cleared that low bar quite easily. And I imagine the bar is even lower for him this time.
So you're saying Joe Biden's been acting like an old man for the last 3 years just as a debate tactic?
To set expectations.
To set expectations so low.
Very canny, very canny. But also, it's not just about the expectations, it's also about the fact he needs to prove that he has it.
Yes.
He needs to, for the people who think he's too old and that he's comatose, he needs to prove he's not. Yep. And so the debate is the best way to do that.
And the two truisms, I guess, Biden himself says, don't compare me with the almighty, compare me with the alternative. Well, here I am with the alternative. And also, he wants, again, the truism of politics, you want it to be a choice, not a referendum. Don't make this about whether Joe Biden and his economy is working for your family yet. Make it about, it's either me or him. He's crazy.
Yeah, and I also feel like I've said many times on this show that this election, what Joe Biden wants this to be, is as much about Trump as possible. And the best way to make it about Trump is to have him debate. So I think it's in Biden's interest, and I think he should debate. I think, the bottom line is this is going to come down to, does Trump want to have a debate?
Yeah.
If Trump doesn't want to have a debate, there will be no debate.
Yeah.
But if Trump does want to have a debate,
Donald Trump is the decisive factor.
And especially for the third-party candidates that you raised before, I don't think either one of them want either of those. There's one Kennedy there for sure, because you never know which way Kennedy is going to help or hurt.
Yep.
There's a risk for both of them. So I think they're going to both try to not have Kennedy in that debate. There may end up being, if there's no debate, there may end up being a Cornel West versus Jill Stein debate on some cable channel.
Yes.
But I think that might be it. We'll see.
Yeah, and we're going to get some really interesting insights into a lot of the thinking in the Biden camp, how they're combating the age issue, what they're thinking of the polls. We're going to talk to friend of the show, Celinda Lake, next week on Planet America. So make sure you tune in for that on Wednesday night.
That's a bunch of malarkey.
Yes, I've got some malarkey I've been trying to get off my chest for some time now, Chaz. Trump has been making some rather newsworthy posts on Truth Social, such as this week. He couldn't help but notice amongst those ads for Letters to Trump, his best-selling book, and Trump's own Christmas wrapping paper, just in time for the holidays. The former president reposted this alleged fact from his Uber fan Joel Fisher, who claimed that ahead of the violent attack by Trump supporters on January 6, 2021, that, quote, President Trump requested 10,000 National Guard troops be assigned to the Capitol. Now, as you recall, the National Guard is kind of like our Army Reserve. It's generally controlled by the individual states. Trump and his former Chief of Staff, Mark Meadows, have made a number of claims similar to Joel since 2021, but fact-checkers say no, 4 Pinocchios. They say, in fact, the Pentagon has no record of such an order for 10,000 troops being given by Donald Trump or anyone in his administration. We do know that the Mayor of Washington, D.C., Muriel Bowser, she requested help from the National Guard a week before January 6th and the violence. That according to the Acting Defence Secretary, Christopher Miller. Trump speculated that you're going to need 10,000 people. But Miller said, when he said that, it wasn't an order from Trump. It was just an offhanded, vague observation at the end of a meeting that was about Iran. Miller also told the House January 6th committee that Trump thought that the National Guard should possibly be deployed to protect the protesters, not the Capitol and members of Congress. Take a look.
What was the president's response to you with regard to the request made by Mayor Bowser?
Fill it and do whatever was necessary to protect the demonstrators and that were executing their constitutionally protected rights.
So that whole idea that Trump wanted 10,000 troops, it is simply malarkey, Chaz, and the fact that he's now blaming Nancy Pelosi for not wanting the 10,000 troops, that is also untrue. It was the Capitol Police who are, yes, technically can take orders from the Speaker of the House, who did not get the resources that they asked for. They got a few hundred, but the 10,000 were never requested by anyone, certainly not Donald Trump.
Is that a rare double malarkey?
I think it is a double malarkey. Let's do it. That's it for another Fireside Chat. Hope you can join us for Planet America Wednesday night, 9:30 p.m. on ABC TV.
Of course, both Wednesday and Friday shows are on ABC iView, Facebook and YouTube whenever you like, and you'll find the Pet Podcast in all the very finest pod places, but not until Tuesday. Today, Dave's a little bit sick. Sorry.
Oh, good night, Dr. Dave. Bye.